the courts have rarely used privacy to stop the the Indian state from getting into someone's business. So jurisprudentially, it is a weak challenge when you mount a, say a rights-based or privacy right challenge against surveillance by the state. Because the answer of the state to that has always been, and has been Obama's answer in the United States, that there are national security concerns. And usually national security will trump individual privacy. So it's not a smart way to agitate a case or a cause, because the state always has this collective interest, or so it alleges, of national security to stop that kind of privacy interest. So to my mind, I think the better questions and the better ways of engaging this sort of concern has always been an individual's interest in free speech, or a people's interest or a community's interest in free speech, a community or people's interest in dissent, the chilling effect that the state's surveillance programs anywhere in the world have on free speech, have on citizens' ability to dissent, have on different new political movements emerging because of a sort of a collective conversation that you can have without the state being part of that conversation. So I think, yes, I mean, so for me, I find privacy to be, shall we say, a fragile right. And it's not a right that I see as being particularly efficient or potent in addressing concerns, and often justified concerns, of national security. When it comes to assessing certain conduct by the state, whether it's the United States sort of collective project of surveillance, whether it's and we have a similar project of surveillance in India, where we've talked about this, where vans will sweep neighborhoods and pick up and tape vast quantums of information, which are basically conversations on phones that people are having. And it's not a particularly effective way of actually targeting a individual. So what it does is it targets vast groups of people. And this is how, modern day states actually keep track of the conversations and the information that their citizens are actually engaging in. And I guess, the problem with that is, I think that when you challenge that with privacy, we've discussed this, you have a national security concern that is thrown back at you. The other part of the story, which is that how does a democratic constitutional state function, is never part of that challenge or that conversation. And part of constitutional democracies is the ability for citizens to be able to, one, disagree with their state, two, to be able to launch new and effective political movements, three, for political opponents not to be preyed upon on grounds of national security, four, I think, for the formation of opinions. And the business of forming opinions in a constitutional democracy is about, people having conversations with each other, is about education of people on issues. And the moment the state comes in and interrupts those conversations, that has a chilling effect on what happens in a constitutional democracy. And the notion of, constitutionalism permeating through a country is definitely about different generations of people being able to have free conversations, and different generations of people being confident that their rights will be protected in a court of law. But all of this, that, this context of a constitutional democracy means that you have people sort of, having conversations with each other. And so to my mind, I don't think that privacy is an effective way to facilitate those conversations. And I think that that's our primary interest against, in agitating against surveillance, which is you want your citizens to be able to have meaningful conversations, both with each other and with the state and with the government and with the executive and with parliamentarians. Why is the state not able to give us more information? Or why is the state in its own investigation and prosecution, and I do a lot of criminal defense work, and the state at the best of times doesn't seem to have enough information? And I'm always struck by, well, if you're tapping all our phones, how do you not have the information you need to address issues like taxes, to address issues of corruption and dishonesty, decision making that is extremely flawed by persons, by elites in positions of power? How is it that our state has so little information on that? How is it that that information very rarely gets into a court of law? But yet there is this moving, thriving surveillance project on. So who is the state keeping track of? That's the real point, and that's something that I'm very interested in. Because if the state is keeping track of me, then that's kind of like it's like a flawed premise, right? Because I am paying my taxes, and I have, absolutely nothing to hide. But it is, so to me, I think it's also about how is the state using its resources? Because surveillance is an expensive undertaking. And if there are groups of people who must be profiled and surveilled, then there has to be, there has to be a logic to it. And that logic has to play into the premise of how this country and why this country is a constitutional democracy. And so those are sort of my concerns, and those are kind of the concerns that I think that judges in this country take seriously. I'm not sure that privacy is a concern that is taken that seriously. I think greater transparency of regulatory, of operations, accountability mechanisms, you cannot have an open surveillance program without having a regulated and accountable intelligence services sector. And in India, we're probably the only constitutional democracy where our intelligence agencies are not provided for by statute and not regulated by statute and do not have parliamentary oversight. And I find this absolutely shocking because it means that you have no way of ensuring accountability. As citizens, I think we're all invested in not being attacked and having better quality security. But we're equally invested in doing that in an appropriate fashion, in an efficient fashion, and in a constitutional fashion, none of which seems to be happening at the moment. So I frankly think that the conversation of security versus privacy is characterized in this fashion because it suits the state to characterize it. And I think all of us should be invested in recharacterizing that conversation by saying that it's really a conversation about security concerns versus a more efficient way of keeping people safe. This is not that way.